You know, one of the things I like about being a professional fly fisherman is to get a chance to fish in many wonderful places, but also the teaching part. I do a lot of sport shows and fly fishing clubs. Several years back, I made the acquaintance of Arnie Gidlow and Chuck Stranahan. Both are from Montana. Both are really brilliant fly tyers. Arnie's a guide up on the Missouri River, and he has some wonderful patterns that work well on the Missouri River, which is a tailwater. And he's got a great caddis pattern that we're going to start off and show you. Then we're going to come back with Chuck Stranahan, who was in my Tying Flies with Jack Dennis and Friends book, and he's going to tie a new pattern of his, a green drake. I know you're going to enjoy it. Now, Mike, I know we're going to talk about a man that you've known and shares your passion for bird shooting. A man who's up on the Missouri River. He's an ex-school teacher. He's been at the shows for a number of years. He's a great fly tyer and a great guide. Arnie Gidlow.
Yeah, Jack, and Arnie's got a great operation up there on the Missouri. In fact, my wife and I went up there this summer and we spent a little time with Arnie. It's a great river, and Arnie's the guy that probably knows more about it, or as much anyway, as anybody does.
The Spring Creek Caddis is the pattern I developed when I was guiding down the West Yellowstone area. It incorporates several very important features that I like in caddis patterns. Probably the most important feature of a caddis fly, I believe, is the wing silhouette. I'm going to use a unique wing material that I think will be a vast improvement over many wing materials that are used in caddis patterns. Another aspect of caddis flies that I think is also very, very valuable and very important is to have the body laying in the water. Most caddis flies do not ride above the water as typical caddis pattern is tied in many conventional patterns. So I think there's two vast improvements in this pattern. So let's go ahead and tie that pattern. I'm going to use a Dairiki 135C hook. There are several reasons I use this style of hook. Probably the greatest advantage of using a scud hook, I believe, is that the wide gape gives you much better hooking percentages, or much better hooking success when you're fishing this pattern. Because this is going to be an extended body pattern, I don't need a whole lot of shank to work with. So let's go ahead and tie on some 6/0 gray tying thread. Most caddis patterns I'm going to be tying are going to be very drab, natural earth tone colors. The body material I like to use is elk hair. Elk hair has good qualities for tying extended body flies. There are several good qualities that I want to incorporate in this pattern with elk hair. First of all, elk hair has a tough outside cuticle, which makes it a little bit more durable than other natural bodies of hair. I also like it because it dyes quite readily in many, many different colors. And it also stacks well. Let's go ahead and remove some of those underfurs. I'm just going to go ahead and flick the base of that hair to go ahead and remove some of the underfurs and some of the short hairs. Now let's go ahead and put it in a hair stacker. We'll bring the hair stacker over here, put it in the hair stacker, and make several, 3 or 4 sharp wraps with that hair stacker. Now you should get some nice even tips. We're only going to use a portion of this elk hair. There you can see that it's stacked very, very well, and the tips are all even. Let's go ahead and take the tips of that elk hair and lay it extended over the eye of the hook about 1/2 inch. All right, one problem that a lot of people have with elk hair and other hollow fibers is that the material likes to spin and roll on the hook shank. I'm going to show you a technique that will eliminate a lot of that rolling problem, and it will keep the material where you want it on the hook shank. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make 2 loose wraps around that material. All right? What I've made is an encircling wrap that's now going to trap that material where I want it to stay, in this particular case on top of the hook shank. Now I'm going to tighten 180 degrees away from where I want that material to stay. Have you noticed now that the material is not flared around the hook shank? Now the material is up where I want it, which is going to be on the top part of the hook. If you want some hair on the side or underneath the hook, use that same technique. Make 2 loose wraps and then tighten 180 degrees away from where you want that material to lay or stay, and it will stay there, it won't roll. If you use constant thread tension, the thread torque will roll the material constantly around and it won't stay distributed where you want it. All right, now let's go ahead and run that tying thread. I'm going to make a couple fortifying wraps there so it doesn't roll around the shank of the hook. You may have also noticed that I made some under wraps of tying thread. That gives it a nice solid foundation so that the material will not lay around. Now, a lot of people have problems tying extended bodies, and one problem they have is maintaining good thread control. This is the technique I use. You can develop any technique that you want to, but this allows me to have constant control of the thread. What I'm going to do is I'm going to roll the tying thread, and as I bring it back, I'm going to grasp it with my ring finger and my little finger of my left hand. And this way I never let go of the tying thread as I'm bringing it back. Now make those spacings or wraps nice and even as you come back through the body. Now I've used a lot more elk here than I would typically use for most of my caddis pattern. One thing you may notice about this caddis pattern is how plump and full the body is. If you look at adult caddis have very robust bodies. That's one complaint I have about most conventional caddis pattern, is they're tied with very, very thin abdomens. An adult caddis is a very short, stubby-bodied insect. All right, that last wrap, make 2 wraps on itself. That will kind of fortify the thread so it doesn't slide off your elk here. Now let's go back, and again, using the same technique, grasp the thread with your index finger and your ring finger of your left hand. Now you've created a nice extended body. Now let's cut off the excess here. In order to go ahead and get that fairly close to the tying threads and also to give it a tapered look, I'm going to make 2 diagonal cuts. I'm not going to make a vertical cut. A vertical cut, first of all, will give me a very harsh ending, which isn't very typical of an adult caddis body. Number 2, you have a tendency of trying to get too close to the tying threads, and cutting that thread will go ahead and put you to tears. So make 2 diagonal cuts, and that'll give you a more tapered appearance. All right, now we're ready for that wing assembly. This is the caddis wing material that I'm going to use. This is a very unique fabric that has good flexibility, but also it's firm enough so it doesn't roll and split after your caddis has been taken by a few fish. Now, you can cut these out manually. I prefer to use as much as possible to get consistency in my patterns tools. This is the tool that I use to actually stamp these wings out. I use an acetate stamp like this and just punch them out, and it gives you nice uniformity in all your caddis wings. What I'm going to do to create a nice looking caddis wing is put at the apex of the wing a V-notch in there. That V-notch will also allow me to lay the wing over the body and get a nice caddis silhouette. Now let's take this caddis wing material and lay it over the abdomen of my extended body. And I want the V-notch to lay right at the end of the abdomen. And what I'm going to do is roll that nice flexible wing material over the top of the abdomen so it conforms to the body. This will give me that nice tent-like appearance that is so important in a caddis pattern. Now again, to prevent rolling of the material, let's make 2 loose wraps and then tighten 180 degrees away from where you want that material to stay. Of course, this is going to be on top of the fly. See how that's situated there? You get that nice tent-like appearance. Now let's trim off the excess in the front. 2 or 3 wraps is sufficient to go ahead and secure this wing material. All right, now let's take those elk fibers which are laying forward over the eye of the hook and use your thumbnail, one of the most important fly tying materials you have, the old thumbnail, and press those tips of that elk here so that they kind of flare and lay upward like so. Now let's go ahead and take some of those middle fibers out. You know, caddis has just 4 or 6 pairs of legs out there. To have too bulky of a leg assembly out there. If this pattern didn't have some outriggers or some legs, it wouldn't set in the correct orientation on the water. Now we've got about 8 or 10 fibers laying out on each side. One thing I want to always incorporate in my Spring Creek patterns is the correct light refractive pattern. In addition to having that body down in the water, I also want to make sure that I get the right leg refractive pattern out on that water. That caddis has nice, long, spindly legs, so I want to incorporate that. And of course, with that elk hair, you get fairly fine fibers that are very durable and very tough. Now, how am I going to separate those out and get that into a nice looking caddis shape? All right, let's take some fine denier dubbing and use just a very small quantity on your tying thread. We want to create what I call a very small dubbing rope. Dubbing rope is what I refer to as the dubbing on the tying thread. Just use a small quantity, just enough to cover the tying thread. All right, and be a little bit conservative. this fine denier dubbing is always a lot easier to add a little dubbing than try to take some off. All right, now let's make 2 wraps of that dubbing right in front of the wing assembly. This creates a little bulk or buildup. One thing I do not want these legs to do is fold back along the body. So I'm going to create just a little bit of extra buildup right in front of that wing to prevent it from laying backward. Now, as I bring that thorax dubbing forward, I'm going to pull out these legs, and I want them to come out the side of the body. That's quite critical in order to get that right light refractive pattern. I'm going to spin the vise here to show you how that's coming out the side of the body. Now as I bring it up on the near side, again I'm going to stroke back and tease back a couple of fibers and wrap the dubbing. See how that's going to separate out the legs? This gives me that nice long caddis-like appearance for the legs. It's also going to create an outrigger effect so that the pattern will sit on the water properly. Let's tease back a couple more legs on the far side. Let me turn that vise so you can see what I'm doing. I want a very broad and light leg assembly on this caddis pattern. Here on the near side, I'm going to do likewise. Pull and tease some of those back. If some of them start splaying forward and start getting tied down, again, you can make some extra wraps. You have the luxury with an adult caddis of having, again, a very robust or built-up thorax. Let's make a little bit more dubbing in the front just to pull a few more of those fibers back. Okay. And now, be sure, of course, to leave an eye length behind the eye of the hook to form a good-looking head. And also, to be able to tie this pattern on with a 5 or 6/6 tippet. If you're a real perfectionist, you can add some micro fibbits to the front to create some antennae. Hopefully the fish won't be counting our antennae. If they do, they're going to be pretty difficult to catch. But let's go ahead just for perfection's sake. It doesn't take much. Let's tie on a couple of fibbits. I'm going to stroke those fibers back in the front. Just make a couple of 3/4 securing wraps. Pull those fibbits up. If you want to separate them more, you can with your tying thread. Now let's go ahead and whip finish. And let's make 4 or 5 wraps with our whip finish. And now you've got completed one of my favorite caddis patterns. It's both very durable, but it also has a wonderful silhouette. It sits low in the water like an adult caddis, and it will be a pattern that will take more than one fish. This has been a very effective pattern for me throughout the West, and particularly my river, the Missouri River. We have some wonderful caddis hatches, and I hope it's a successful pattern for you. It's a very simple pattern with doesn't incorporate a lot of materials. So I hope it's successful, and let me know how it works.